There are not many people where you can read one line and it sums up the impact. I know Joe Callahan, Professor Joe Callahan, is the person who connected with Bernie and invited him to join us, so he deserves a lot of thanks and credit on our behalf. But I was looking up some intros, and there was a line that said, Bernie Finkelstein has been a world leader in Canadian and worldwide music for 45 years. So Bernie must have been a child prodigy, but I mean, just think about what that means in terms of all the musicians that Bernie has nurtured and cultivated, and the impact that he has had on Canadian music, and again, our Canadian musicians around the world. People like Bruce Coburn and Murray McLaughlin and Blue Rodeo and others. Just 550 albums, I know, released by True North. So it's just an honor to have Bernie here today. Thank you so much for joining us. And Bernie is a part-time denizen of the county, so he knows this wonderful area of the world. But thank you so much for joining us. And again, it's an honor and a privilege. And please join me in welcoming Bernie Finkelstein. Turn it over to my good buddy since 1977, Professor Joe Callahan. Thank you, Joe.
Well, thanks, Maureen, for doing that. Yeah, Disco Darkroom, right, Maureen?
Absolutely.
We used to do Disco Dark. Well, it is an honor to have Bernie here, and I've prepared a little bit of an introduction, so I will sort of read as I go along, because I don't remember it all. But slowly and surely, North American culture is coming to know that behind every successful man, there's a long-suffering and more intelligent woman, right? Is that right? We occasionally acknowledge that behind every successful artist, oxymoronic as that sadly is, there's a long-suffering and more intelligent and equally creative manager. Bernie Finkelstein has personified these virtuous truths. But until I shared some time with Bernie, what I failed to realize that was behind every loving human is a warmer soul. And that warm soul, like Bernie, would grace the halls of so-called higher education, represented in this case by Loyalist College, one of 25 colleges in a system that struggles to hold on to any such grace and a little dignity, is poetic and perhaps, I hope, prophetic. Post-secondary education needs Bernie Finkelstein. The communities that are served by colleges and universities need Bernie Finkelstein. The countries of the world that depend on the hope symbolized by the idea of democracy need Bernie Finkelstein. Because Bernie Finkelstein is enlightened. Bernie enabled artists he represented to be who and what they are, and he nurtured the flames of hope that burned passionately in those warm souls. Bernie's enlightenment found form in a fast-paced, ego-driven profit-seeking world of commercial music, and he played that game as well as anyone could, managing many of Canada's visionary musicians, ensuring the success of their songs, from Murray McLaughlin's Farmer Song that touched the hearts of indifferent urbanites to Rough Trade's call for justice in the gay community. Bernie Finkelstein pulled the strings of a powerful and virtuous puppet called popular music. But in all that commercial success that Bernie acquired for the artists he represented, it is his relationship with one that symbolizes perhaps his greatest achievement. His ongoing and over 40-year relationship with Bruce Coburn. Managers and artists don't often stay together that long, and like Bernie and Bruce have. They've traveled a psychic gamut together from the coffee houses of Toronto's now trendy Yorkville in the 60s to the war zones of Nicaragua and Afghanistan, and others, bringing Coburn's exquisite, musical, poetic poignancy to an ever-growing and worldwide audience. Tonight's lecture is not about Bernie's enlightenment, though. He'd hate that presumptuous characterization. As a part of the business component of a new course here at Loyalist called Music as an Agent of Change, Bernie is volunteering information for Loyalist students about his experience making money in the music industry and how he got to the bank, as he says in the preface of his remarkable book, True North, which will be available at the back of the hall tonight. Bernie's graciously going to sign as many as we can sell. Just for the record, no CBC producer wrote this script. Ladies and gentlemen, Bernie Finkelstein.
I gotta get rid of Joe's speech here. Whoops. I took a breath. And as always, there we go. Thank you very much. I actually, this is not part of my, what I wrote out, but hearing Joe talk just reminded me, you know, I went to grade 9 at Trenton High School. My father was in the Air Force, and Trenton, of course, is the large military base. We all are aware of that. At the time that I went, it was an Air Force base, and my father was a career Air Force person. So I went to grade 9 at Trenton High School, and you know, I failed grade 9 here, as everybody else did, I thought, at the school. But military, that's not a comment on the school. Military children don't always do well at school. So Joe wanted me to talk about music as a change agent, and I'm not so sure that that's exactly what I'm going to stick to, because I'm not really a professor and things, but I am living proof that music is a change agent, and in fact is, because when I started, I used to be 6 feet tall, I was blonde, and I was 20. So it's definitely changed me. But I'll let you know a little secret also. Joe, I wasn't even Joe's first choice to do this, actually. Joe, which, you know, is always humbling. Joe actually called me out of the blue to see if he could get Bruce Coburn to come here. And, you know, it's a good idea. Bruce doesn't do very much public speaking, although now that he has his book out, he does the odd thing. But anyway, Bruce couldn't do it. He's living mostly in San Francisco, although he too has a home not far from here, north of Kingston. But he spends a lot of time in San Francisco, where he's got a new family and a new 3-year-old daughter. His daughter wasn't 3 when she was born, but it's 3 years ago when she was born. So Joe, who is not one to waste a dime for a phone call, when I said no, Bruce couldn't come, he very astutely, and you'll be glad to see how he uses your budget, their president, asked me if I would come and do it. So here I am. Now, talking about Bruce, I think he'd be the first to tell you that, you know, a song can't really change much, other than maybe your mood, maybe your understanding of an issue. But when it's coupled to a movement or a shared experience, a song can mean a lot. Let me clear my throat. It can become the common currency that people use to explain how they feel about a subject and contribute momentum to ideas that change things. Bruce has written songs that have made a big difference in how people see subjects. I'm not sure how many of you know If I Had a Rocket Launcher, Colored Democracy, Stolen Land, Lovers in a Dangerous Time, If a Tree Falls. But each of these songs and several more have had large impacts on people's perceptions and ideas about very important subjects. I'll tell you a little story about If I Had a Rocket Launcher, which became a pretty big international hit in 1985-86, and is still being played today. In fact, the other day when I was cruising around on YouTube, which I do very often, I like everybody else, enjoy going on YouTube, and you know, it's where I hear a lot of the new music I hear, and also I enjoy looking at how the music I was involved in, or still am involved in, is doing. And I was, there's a lot of versions of Rocket Launcher on, you know, Bruce performing it live in this place or that place, or the original video. And when you add it all up, which you know, you have to always be somewhat skeptical about my math, but you know, there's over 2 million hits on If I Had a Rocket Launcher, which is pretty astounding. Now, that's not the billion zillion that Katy Perry and others have, but for us, it's really an amazing thing, and it really keeps these things alive. Although, as Bruce would tell you, not that I'm here to put words in his mouth, is that he would hope that the message of a song like that was no longer relevant. But in the world we live in, it's relevant, and unfortunately, it looks like it's even more relevant. But anyway, getting back to the story I wanted to tell you, Bruce first played me If I Had a Rocket Launcher when we were on tour in Australia. We were in Melbourne. This might have been in 1983, 84. He had just returned from Central America where he wrote that song. I won't go into all the details why he wrote it. But when he played it for me in the dressing room, and as you probably know, that song has a line in it that goes, "If I had a rocket launcher, some son of a bitch would die." And when Bruce played it, I was totally blown away at the quality of the song. I will also tell you, he played me Lovers in a Dangerous Time at the same time, and those two songs ended up on the same album, and that album, really in many ways, is the biggest album Bruce ever put out. But he was actually not going to record If I Had a Rocket Launcher. He was very fearful of it being misinterpreted, and it still actually does get misinterpreted. It's easy to understand why people could hear that. And he did not want to have a call to violence. It's the furthest thing from his nature. And he understood that it could be problematic, but of course when you listen to the whole song, it's really Bruce reacting to the horrors he had seen in Central America, and not a call to violence at all. But fortunately, I think for Bruce, certainly, and fortunately for me, Bruce decided that he should record it because self-censorship is perhaps the worst kind of censorship that one can put on oneself. Censorship is bad in all its forms, but self-censorship is, although I guess actually I'm get into a lecture about censorship, but again, one does have to be cautious, of course, about you don't yell fire in a theater. We understand that, but I think in the arts, to censor oneself because you're worried that people aren't going to understand you is a losing idea. So anyway, thankfully Bruce recorded the song, and we were both shocked when it became such a big hit. We had no thoughts of that being a hit record whatsoever, although I did think that it was good, and I did decide to put it out as a single, so it wasn't entirely an accident, but like many things that I did in the music business, some of the best things were kind of accidental. But controversy in songs was not new to me at that time. So again, we released that record in 84, 85. But prior to that, just a few years earlier, in 1980, I signed a band called Rough Trade, which featured their lead singer, Carol Pope. And they made a wonderful, wonderful debut album called White Fright. And I don't know, for the younger people here, and I don't necessarily assume that even the older people here know all of these records. You really don't want to make a lot of assumptions when you're in the entertainment business. You want to just keep your head down and work hard and just hope for the best. But if you haven't heard Rough Trade, you really should, as quickly as you can, and nothing's really replaced them, really, when you come down to it. But anyway, the album was full of songs that dealt with sexual politics. Carol was a lesbian, but that was during a period back in 1980 where in the music business, at least, and probably in a lot of fields, gay people had not really so commonly come out of the closet. You'll have to hear the song to understand what I'm talking about. But anyway, we did make a hit of High School Confidential, which I talk about in my book, and I won't detail all of that. But in the song, she had a line in it that says, "She makes me cream my jeans." This was not the usual thing you heard on the radio then, or even now. I decided we'd put this out as a single, and one very brave radio broadcaster, actually Chum AM in those days. There was Chum AM and Chum FM, but Chum AM was still top 40 radio was really the thing. A lot of the younger folks are going, top 40 radio, what's that? But anyway, no, it still exists, doesn't it? Anyway, they asked me, they said, if you could beep out the word cream, we think we could play this record. So got together with the band, Carol and Kevin Staples are the other principal in the band, and we decided to beep it. So now what you heard was, she makes me beep my jeans when she walks my way. And the radio station, well, that's interesting. So, the radio station accepted the edit and started to play the record, and lo and behold, the phones lit up, and high school went on to be a big, big hit. In fact, the album sold over 200,000 copies in Canada alone, and probably by now, I don't know how many it sold by now because it sold the company in 2007. But anyway, it continues to do very well. And I can't tell you how many people called our office. I can't tell you how important it was to a lot of people, gay and otherwise, that not that particular song only, but that the message that Rough Trade had got out there, and that people were pretty accepting of it. And Rough Trade went on to sell at concert halls all over North America. And they had a short career, but a good career. They made 6 albums for us. Anyway, and eventually radio actually played the uncensored version, which is what always happens, is that radio will play a song where they ask for an edit because of the content, usually it's swear words, that they don't like the most, but it can be other things. And if the record becomes a hit, they often revert to the original because just time makes things safe, I think. Now, another artist that I worked with who was also no stranger to controversy was Murray McLaughlin. Murray was the first artist on True North to get a gold record. It was a single farmer's song, which was a salute to Canadian farmers that should be close to everybody's heart here in this very verdant part of the world. However, it was not always easy going for Murray, or for that matter, the whole of the Canadian music business back in those days. Murray's hit farmer song was in 1971. As hard as it might be to believe, back in the 60s, and certainly well into the 70s, most people automatically thought Canadian music was somehow inferior. It's kind of strange. I think people don't really feel that way now. But it was a long battle to change the mindset. The mindset was partly at radio, but it was partly in the public as well. And in 1971, the Canadian content regulations were passed. So, irrespective of what radio might have thought, they had to play, started off as 25%, and then it went to 30%, and today it's at 35%, although most stations volunteer to play 40%. Anyway, there's a whole lecture one could do about that whole period. And I was quite involved in getting that law, not getting the law, but motivating Ottawa to pass that law. Although I was only one of many people, and I certainly wasn't in the lead. But I went to Ottawa and I helped. And for you to know exactly what I'm talking about, really, is in 1969, you got to listen to this very carefully, because it's hard to believe, but in 1969, that's 2 years before the regulation came out, only 1.5% of the music being played on Canadian commercial radio, 1.5% was Canadian. So, you know, that's just totally unacceptable, isn't it? I mean, you wouldn't want to live in a country that has 1.5% of its own artists on the airwaves. So that's why that regulation had to pass, and it did. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read you a bit of my book that deals with Murray and the consequences of the attitude that said music is inferior. This story takes place in 1976, which is 7 years after I started my record company, True North, and about 18 years after I'd first gotten into business. You know, it's amazing. I said this the other day. I said it to my wife, but said it to somebody. It's hard for me to believe that I can now say things like, well, yeah, 50 years ago, I was doing this. Like, it's unbelievable. I didn't even think I'd live to be 50. But I did. And here I am. So, okay, so I'm going to just do this. Fairly well organized right now. It's shocking to me. By 1975, I'm going to read from the book. I'm not going to keep you there too long with this. By 1975, True North had released 15 albums. Not a large number, but the record company was moving along at a clip that was manageable, and the results were pretty satisfactory, particularly on the artistic side. On June 15, 1976, around the time Murray's single On the Boulevard was high on the charts, we received a call from a friend asking if we had seen the evening's TV news. Apparently, the assistant general manager of the Canadian National Exhibition, that's the C&E, Howard Tate, who was also responsible for booking the talent at the C&E's grandstand, had just been on CBC's show 24 Hours, saying that he would never book a performer like Murray McLaughlin. He was being interviewed by the show's host, Bruce Rogers, and the other guest was a well-known city alderman named Ben Nobleman, who was a strong supporter of Canadian talent and thought the C&E should feature more of it. What really stunned us was that Tate had apparently said Murray was too lewd. First thing I thought was, geez, how did I get involved in my dinners? But anyway, but he's on the air saying Murray was too lewd. There was a CBC office right next door to our offices at Alexander Church in Toronto. So we called some people we knew there and made arrangements to take a look at the broadcast. Here's a bit of the transcript, so try to help me with this. So Mr. Nobleman, he's the Toronto councillor. He says, why don't you ask Murray McLaughlin to play the CD? Mr. Tate, he's the talent booker at the Canadian National Exhibition, says, because I don't want that kind of show on the grandstand, Ben, you know better. Mr. Nobleman says, how do you know? Mr. Tate says, because I've seen the show. Mr. Nobleman, but he's one of the top pop singers. And then the CBC host, Mr. Rogers, pipes in and says, so what's wrong with him, with Murray? Mr. Tate, well, his language, his story, his show, the whole darn thing. I mean, Bruce, really. Mr. Nobleman, what is wrong with his language? Mr. Tate, look at Ben. You want your 8-year-old sitting in the stands and listening to this guy? And then during the same interview, the following exchange happened. Oh, he's had a little drink of his water. So Nobleman says, he's the counselor, I'll remind you, I'm not saying it is, but I will. What about Bruce Coburn? Tate says, no, we haven't approached him. Nobleman goes, you haven't? He says, no, but who is Bruce Coburn? I guess, you know, at first when I thought about writing this, I thought, it's pretty damning to me, I think, really. You know, what's going on here? I guess I wasn't doing much of a job. But anyway, a little later, this exchange occurred. This is all in the same show. Nobleman. No, it is not. You admitted you didn't even try to call Murray McLaughlin or Bruce Coburn. Mr. Tate, I will not. I told you before I wouldn't have that type of show on the grandstand or even on the grounds of the band shell or anywhere. I don't want that kind of stuff on our grounds. Mr. Nobleman, but you haven't even tried. Mr. Tate, I don't want to try. So anyway, I talked it over with Murray and my then partner, Bernie Fiedler. Me and Bernie Fiedler at that time owned the Riverboat in Toronto, by the way. Shortly thereafter, we're going to close it. That's usually what happens when I mention the Riverboat. Not that doesn't happen. Oh, excuse me. Edit. Okay. I talked it over with Murray and Fiedler, and although none of us were too pleased, we just shrugged it off. We still lived in a world where being a Canadian act meant you were constantly looked upon with suspicion. So who really cared what the assistant GM of the C&E thought? The dogs bark and the caravan moves on. However, the next morning while I was eating breakfast, I got a call from another friend asking me if I had heard that morning's CBC radio show. So once again, I called my contacts at CBC and listened to a tape of it. And once again, it featured Mr. Tate, this time being interviewed by Harry Brown, the host of CBC's Metro Morning. All of this was happening just 5 days after Murray had performed with Gordon Lightfoot, Sylvia Tyson, and Leon Boyd at a sold-out benefit for Canada's Olympic athletes at Maple Leaf Gardens. The following is in response to Mr. Brown asking Mr. Tate why the C&E didn't book more Canadian talent. Mr. Tate, well, you name them and we'll try to get them. Mr. Brown, well, you know. Mr. Tate, no, this is fine. It's so easy because we are the Canadian National Exhibition. It is so easy to sit back and criticize that nobody comes up with any sound, reasonably good names of Canadian talent that we can put on the grandstand. I asked the same question of Nobleman last night, and Ben came back and made up a whole bunch of things that you wouldn't want your children to sit and listen to. And there is no way we are going to change our policy. Mr. Brown, tell me the ones that Mr. Nobleman suggested that I wouldn't want my kids to sit and listen to. Well, McLaughlin, for example. Mr. Brown, Bernie McLaughlin? Mr. Tate, yes, and also Brown interjects and says, why wouldn't I want my kids to sit and listen to him? Tate, well, I don't think you would because Nobleman said that certainly he would have to change his act, and I agree with him, and I don't think that he would do that. And after all, Mr. Brown, well, just wait a minute. The kids could sit and watch him at Maple Leaf Gardens the other night. Mr. Tate, well, that's fine, but we are not going to go down that. We're not going to do that down here because we feel that this is a family outing and is the only place left in metropolitan Toronto where you can bring your family and enjoy it without being offended. And you can't take your kids to the theaters and things like this nowadays and enjoy a theater without the exception of a very limited number of movies that are produced for kids, and that is our policy. One more snippet from the radio interview is interesting. Mr. Brown, yesterday the C&E announced part of its lineup for this year's grandstand shows, and only one Canadian artist will appear. That's Bachman Turner Overdrive. Yesterday we spoke to Alderman Ben Nobleman of York. He is quite outraged, and today we have the Assistant General Manager of the C&E, Mr. Howard Tate, with us. Good morning, sir. Good morning, Harry. How are you? Okay? Yes, I'm very well. Only one Canadian act in 7. That's all we can get this year. Why? Are we not getting any better? That's the CBC person. So he says, why are we not getting any better? Mr. Tate. This is the man who ran the C&E, or one of the senior people that ran the C&E. Well, we are getting better, but the talent in Canada is not getting any better. Broad statement. At least they won't play here. We have endeavored to get as much Canadian talent as we can. So, there's a point to all of this. As it turned out, the man responsible for booking all the talent at the C&E, a man who represented one of Canada's premier showplaces and should have been familiar with current Canadian music, knew so little that he had confused Murray with another act called McLean and McLean, who, okay, good, I'm glad you know who they were, who indeed were known for their risque songs and live shows. Strange that no one corrected him on the days between the interviews. But none of this really surprised me, because ignorance of Canadian talent was the norm rather than the exception in the 70s. Then, as if his confusion and consequent maligning of Murray's character wasn't bad enough, Tate also disparaged the entire Canadian musical community with the comment, "We are getting better, but the talent in Canada is not getting any better." I just couldn't see how we could let this stand. Murray's reputation had been called into question on both CBC TV and radio. Furthermore, it was a symbol of the battle we were all fighting, not only in our own hometown, but right across the country. Simply, how do you get respect for Canadian talent in an environment that seemed to only have time for imported music? We decided to draw a line in the sand. We would sue the CNE for defamation and libel. Once we let the media know our intentions, the story began to pick up momentum, alarming the CNE's executives enough for them to ask for an immediate meeting with us. They were to be represented by Julian Porter, who was not only the president of the CNE at the time, but by coincidence one of the top libel lawyers in Canada, and still is actually. We were satisfied to be represented by our own lawyer, pal, Bernie Solomon. During that meeting, I was just thinking about the show I watched last night on TV called Call Saul, which is the offshoot show for Breaking Bad. And I was just thinking my lawyer, Bernie Solomon, it's just like that. Anyway, so we called our lawyer, Bernie Solomon. During that meeting, a member of the CNE staff reminded us that Howard Tate had a family. I went crazy when I heard that, and just about jumped across the table screaming, we weren't from Mars, and that we also had families, and maybe, just maybe, Howard Tate and the CNE should have thought about that before being so cavalier and uninformed in public. I'm not sure why, but right after my outburst, their side excused themselves and retired to a private room. They returned a half hour later and asked us what it would take for us to drop the action. We had already decided well before the meeting that what we wanted was a public apology. We weren't really looking for money, although had we wanted it, we probably could have got what would have amounted to a small fortune, given our circumstances. Instead, we worked out the following deal. The CNE would hold a press conference where they would apologize to Murray and further apologize to the whole Canadian music business. Howard Tate would be relieved of his talent booking duties for the CNE, and then he could keep any other job there, of course, we weren't allowed about it, but Howard Tate would be relieved of his talent booking duties for the CNE, and the new bookers replacing him would include Sam Snyderman, the founder of Sam the Record Man Stores, and a strong supporter of Canadian talent. This would be the first and last time I'd have the opportunity to get Sam a job. The CNE would pay for our legal costs and press conference. The statement of apology would acknowledge that during the same week of Mr. Tate's unfortunate statements, the following events were happening in Toronto. And I think in hindsight this was important, though, and I'll tell you what we had agreed. That Rush had just sold out 3 nights at Massey Hall, grossing $42,000, which for the time represented a record gross for a rock and roll band. B, that April Wine had also just sold out Massey Hall, grossing $15,000 and was on a Canadian tour that was grossing over $1 million. That Crawdaddy, one of the leading music magazines in the US, had just hit the stands with an article on Bruce Kohler declaring him as one of the most important artists of the decade. Gordon Lightfoot had just put on a benefit show featuring Murray, McLaughlin, Sylvia Tyson, and Leona Boyd that had grossed $191,000 between the gate and television receipts, and that the CNE would buy full-page ads in both RPM and Record Week based on material supplied by Bernie Finkelstein, and again apologizing to the Canadian music business. RPM and Record Week, it used to be that we had trade magazines. They don't exist anymore. There's a fairly good one online called FYI. The press conference was held June 28th. Journalist Larry LeBlanc, a well-known Canadian music journalist, and publicist extraordinaire Gino Eckery were brought on board as experts. The room was packed with interested observers from in and outside the music business. Pretty much all of the media that mattered were there. Even McLean and McLean responded to our invitation and showed up. Julian Porter was quite eloquent and publicly apologized to both Murray and the entire Canadian music business on behalf of the Canadian National Exhibition. They also ran the ads as promised. The story received major coverage right across the country. The CP Wire story was printed in every major paper across the country and concluded, and this is a quote from the Wire story, Finkelstein, in an interview following the news conference, said he accepts Porter's comments and regards them as sincere. I think an attitude has been exposed, he said. I think in the future, they, that's the C&E officials, will become more aware of the Canadian music scene. Once people are aware, they will take advantage of it. It's good for business. So I don't know if I said that first and Coppola stole that for The Godfather, or whether I took it for The Godfather. I think I probably stole it. But anyway, it's good for business, and indeed it is. Did any of this really matter? Yes, I think it did. An attitude that had been conventional wisdom in Canada was publicly exposed as having no basis in fact. And from time to time, and from that time on, those who were in positions to help us were more inclined to show Canadian musicians the respect they had earned. Personally, I had and continue to have nothing against Howard Tate. I never did see him after this event. I don't think he was being malevolent, nor did he harbor any ill will towards Murray. But he did represent an attitude that was a searing constant in our collective lives. For me, it was always like a war getting recognition for Canadian music. Today it's history, a topic that's been analyzed to death. The topic, well, the whole of it, not just my story. It's been analyzed to death. So I won't go further into it. But when the opportunity came to shine a spotlight on the issue, we took it. I think Mr. Tate was not so different from too many people in influential positions during that time. The only difference was that Mr. Tate was in a position to say what he thought publicly instead of behind closed doors. Unfortunately for him and the C&E, we simply weren't interested in being anyone's target. So that's a piece out of my book. And that pretty much concludes this part of what I'm going to do. I'm going to invite Joe to come up here. I think Joe's invited a couple of musicians to do a few songs. And then I'm going to return and do an interview of some sort with Joe. And then I'm going to hang around and sign books if anybody's interested, or just to say hello, whatever. So thank you very much.
So maybe just as a bit of a segue, one of the things that you say in your book, and it was always central to you as a manager and producer, but the song was always the thing. Right? The song is
those were two excellent songs, really good, well done, guys. Well, I'm not looking at them.
I know that. But if you were looking, if you were still looking, what would you do?
I used to, I'm not sure I was always successful, but it's not so much what I look for in a song, but I wanted an artist to be original. I wanted them to be able to really play their instrument. I wanted them to be able to perform. Those were the kind of things. I did want them to be creative people. I didn't, for instance, if somebody came up to me and said, you just tell me what I want and I'll do it, I would usually pass on that person because I didn't really want to hear what I wanted. Maybe I did in terms of where to play or etc. I didn't want. I wanted to hear people with original, large, but I wanted them to be able to apply it as well. Of course, we have many great guitar players and musicians.
So who excites you today? Who do you?
Well, that's not my answer.
Not going to answer that.
No, I mean, I don't.
That must be.
I don't spend a lot of time spend a lot of time listening to music, but I don't mind admitting that I don't necessarily spend a lot of time listening to new music. I did that for almost 70 years, and now sort of like, you know, I wallow at home in nostalgia. But like for instance, I just heard this incredible record called The Bells by a girl named Lowell. Do you guys know that? Anybody know that record? Yeah. I think it's on the Arts and Crafts label. You know, like everybody else, I like Arcade Fire. It's a band out of Montreal. I think they've split up, you know, and gone different ways. Both great. You know, there's so much great music, you know, but when I was in the middle of the music business, you know, I could rattle it off. It's because it's what I get all the time. But now I'm doing lots of other things as well.
So who's today's...
I don't consider myself to be a music critic.
Who's today's Bernie Finkelstein?
Oh, that's what I don't know that either. There's lots of great entrepreneurs in Canada. We're restricting our conversation to Canada for a minute. That do great jobs. There's several very fine labels in Toronto that I'm really aware of. I know the owners. You know, one of the things I did was I started, along with others, the Canadian Independent Music Association. It's called CIMA. It used to be called CIRPA, Canadian Independent Producers Association. Started it back in 1971. Still going, although it's had an age. And so I only just recently stepped down from that. It's a long-winded way of saying that some of those people that were around that board table, like Jeffrey Remedios at Arts and Crafts, they put in great music. I'm sure you all know it well. Feist, Broken Social Scene, this Bells record that I just talked about, another thing. And Sean and the Car Shed, who owns a label called Six Shooter, has a White Horse. And, Amelia Curran, I was asking your Curran here if they were related. Apparently they're not. Jen Grant and other people. She's a really amazing music person, entrepreneur. There's lots of people around. I mean, you know, you get replaced quickly. Yeah.
What do you say to people like these guys who are, you know, maybe aspiring professionals? What about the business? What do they need to know as musicians about the business?
I don't know what you need to know, but I think you need to have a lot of, you know, you gotta persevere with it. You know, this is like, you know, I never reached the point where I had a complete day where everything was good. You're just not going to get there in the entertainment business. Even if you don't think you're in the entertainment business, if you're in the art business, you just won't get there. I mean, you know, a good day sometimes is 51:49. You know, and you go, well, okay, 51:49. I'll take that. That's okay. It's not bad. But you know, there is no magic bullet. If I had a magic bullet, you know, I would have bought it a long time ago and now it's selling it. But the one thing I know for sure is that you've got to be very dedicated. That although it's good to listen to what other people have to say, in the end, you have to make up your own mind. You can't be swaying back and forth and back and forth. You can't chase your own tail. So, you know, just you know, get out there, do what you're doing now. Do exactly what you just did today. Come, you do these things, and you just hope that it eventually adds up to something. You know.
What are the things?
It's a whole different world anyway. I sold my label in 2007. The digital age had already arrived, but not to the extent that it is in the year 2015. So, you know, many of the things that I know don't even count anymore. But I don't know enough to get by.
You're struggling.
I'm struggling a lot.
One of the things that struck me about your book was that, first of all, you provide an awful lot of detail about things that a lot of people wouldn't. For example, you know, the drug use in those days. And how did you survive that?
Well, a lot of people like to say I didn't.
Well, I mean, you know, assuming that the fact that you're here means you survived.
Well, you know, the one thing that you can't do, I mean, you can't be honest if you're me. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of people in the 60s that never went anywhere near a drug. I don't know any of them. You know, I mean, I that was, I mean, that was the era that I lived in. I was 19, and I lived in Yorkville, and drugs were just part of it. I don't like to glamorize it by any means, but it was part of it, and it was part of the music. You could hear it in the music, really. I mean, I don't think the Beatles are making a record like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band because they were sitting around going to church on Sunday. Although they loved it, you know. So that's maybe not the right metaphor. That's not exactly what I meant to say. What I meant to say was, you know, I mean, obviously a lot of the music in that period was coming and drug influenced in many ways, as was the whole of society. And it was just common usage. And unfortunately, didn't always lead to good things. I'm very aware of that. And I don't know how I survived. I mean, I say in my book at one point I decided that it was time to leave Toronto because I woke up one morning with a girl on one arm and a bag of meth on the other hand. Geez, I'm going to kill myself. This is 1969. So I got rid of the girl and kept the meth.
Elizabeth,
shouldn't talk about these things right now. But what I did do is I did put it all the time.
Yeah, I want to make it clear, you don't glamorize the drugs at all. In fact, it was intrinsic in your day-to-day life.
I've been forced to answer these questions by Joe.
I was taken by, first of all, I was surprised by how much he disclosed. As I was with Bruce's book, I found the personal disclosure was really remarkable. It was never glamorized. It was always, in my opinion at least, it was couched in cautionary tales.
Well, you reach a certain age as well, where you go, well, what have I got to hide now? You know, what's the point? So no, you want to, I don't hold myself up as a paragon of the truth, but when you're writing a book, I think you want to tell the truth. You may not be able to say everything, but you gotta, basically, you may not be able to say everything about every topic, or else the book gets to be a million pages long. But you gotta tell the truth. That's what it's about. And for the songwriters, that's what you gotta do too, in my opinion. You gotta tell the truth in your song.
He's not paying me to say this, but honestly, you need to read these books if you're at all interested in Canadian music. Both of them. They're both enlightening in terms of what goes on there, and that's really, he's not paying me to say that. These books were surprising. They surprised me. They were surprising to me, and really poignant. So 30 years ago today, tears are not enough, right? Like, it's for no reason, these things, right? Did you?
Yeah. So you see, well, they wanted to get Bruce on the shoulder, couldn't do it.
Yeah. So where were you at that time? 1985?
Well, I was in the studio when that song was recorded. The interesting story is although Bruce is part of the song and the video, he wasn't there. He was actually touring in Germany. And Brian Adams, co-songwriter, who wrote the lyrics for that song, whose name is really going to escape me now, his co-writer, it's so terrible, and he finds out about that, he's going to kill me. I have co-wrote. Anyway, he flew to Germany, where Bruce was on tour. We set it up, and he recorded a video. He brought one person with him, a crew person, and they recorded Bruce, his part of that song. He's got a little line later in the song, and videoed him, and then they snapped it back into the video. And if we didn't tell that story, nobody would actually even know, although we didn't hide that story either, but it often doesn't get mentioned. He's the one person, he's the only person on that song and on that video that wasn't actually in the studio. But I was in that studio, and it was amazing, to have Joni Mitchell and Neil Young, members of Rush, and Murray McLaughlin, Carol Pope, and Anne Murray, and Bernie Cummings from the guest room, all in the, you know, there was 30 or 40 people, all in the same room, and they were all loving it, and they all, it was at a studio called Mantis there, and it was in downtown Toronto on Adelaide Street. It was a beautiful, beautiful day. And it was a great song in its own way. You know, I had my doubts at first, and then it just grew on me. I ended up really quite loving it. I'm glad that they're celebrating it.
Yeah, that's cool. So Joni Mitchell and Neil Young, very
Gordon Lightfoot.
Gordon Lightfoot, of course. Yeah, let's start with Joni Mitchell and Neil Young, and even Murray at first went south, right? They went south early.
Yeah, well, you know, in the you know, up until you know, sometime in the 70s, there was no real Canadian music business. I mean, there was bits and pieces, and by no means was I the first to do anything. I wouldn't want to leave you with that impression, but it was very sporadic. It was spread out. It wasn't much happening, and artists had very little choice but to leave because there was no record deals for them in Toronto or other parts of Canada. There's hardly any industry. I never even heard the words Canadian music industry put together until around the middle 70s. So yeah, Joni and Neil, they both moved to California. Joni, I think, went first, and Neil next, and as Leonard Cohen also. Most people did, not everybody. Gordon Lightfoot stayed here. But by the time the Canadian content regulations had kicked in, people started building these great recording studios. The bigger record companies that did exist, multinationals, in those days there were 7 or 8 of them. You know, some of them are still around, like Universal, Sony, which was then CBS. I don't know more people calling names. They were not involved in Canadian music, but they started getting really involved, and things just started to grow. It took a while, but it's still growing. And so yes, people used to leave the country. In many cases, they really didn't come back to home forever.
You can relate the funny story about your advice to Murray a lot.
Yeah, well, you know, I signed Bruce Colbert in 1969 because I started True North in 1969. I've already been in the business for about 5 years. But I decided I should have a label. And in about 1968 or so, Murray, who used to hang out in Yorkville, came running up to me one day on the street and said, hey, you know, no, it was actually in 1969. It was just after I signed Bruce. Bruce and Murray were friends. He said, hey, I hear you started a record company. You got to sign me. And he said, I'll make you $1 million. And I thought it was a pretty good idea. But I wasn't trusting him. No, I was trusting him. I didn't have any money. I had enough money to make Bruce's record. That's all I had. And to get the record to the marketplace. So I told Murray, we became friends after that. And he came to see me a few months later. And he asked me, again, can I sign him? I said, I can't. And I'll tell you what, Murray. What you should do is go to New York. I said, you know, if you want to make a movie, you have to go to Los Angeles. If you want to make a record, you want to get somewhere, go to New York. Now, what I do say in the book is I'm glad I never had to tell anybody else that after that. Because although I don't think it's the worst idea, if you do it on your own choice, go wherever you want, really. But at least one option is you can stay at home. It wasn't so much an option now. So Murray did go to New York, and actually, while he was there, Tom Rush, who in those days was a very, very big singer-songwriter, folk singer, who had a reputation for discovering great songwriters, heard Murray's songs, recorded 2 of them. But Murray got tired of living in New York. He particularly did not enjoy he didn't like how the smog, not the smog, the air qualities that was bothering him. He was always rubbing his eyes. And he came back to Toronto, and he came back exactly at the time that I had some more money. We put out Bruce's record, and I signed him. And I say in the book that I was very lucky to have turned down a talent as big as Murray's, and then get a second chance at it. Got to get lucky.
So the other thing that really surprised me about your involvement with all of this was that you actually produced on the boulevard at the Marina.
I did. I produced a lot. A lot of people may not know what producing is, but because in a sense, I was executive producer of all the records on True North One Way. Some very little, and some a lot, but I was somewhat involved. But by producing, I mean, I was right in the studio. It was like just like
pushing the buttons.
Just like Jay-Z. No, yeah, that's right. No, I was. I was in the studio. Generally screwing things up.
That album was kind of a departure for him, though, too, right? In terms of.
Well, it was big, which was a departure. No, it was.
But I mean, as the group, the Silver Triangles.
Yeah. I produced a lot of his records, and from time to time, I did produce records on True North. But by the early '80s, I gave it up for a couple of reasons. A, my business was getting too big, and I couldn't burn the candle. I mean, what I used to do was I'd go in the recording studio all night and then work all day, 7, 8 days in a row. Barely slept. And it was a lot of fun.
Sometimes sharing places with musicians, right?
Yeah, I did all kinds of things, And, but I also began to realize, in other words, when I put on my hat as president of the record company, we could do better than me. So I, started hiring people, and it became more complicated. When I first started doing it, there wasn't even sliders, or it wasn't all digital. It was like round knobs. I could turn those, but I couldn't. Once I went to more sophisticated equipment, I went, it's too difficult for me. And for the first couple of years, we were kind of 50-50 back and forth, which was wrong. But now we spend about 80 or even more, maybe 90% of our time in the county, and we really love it there. So I got involved very early on in the endeavor to start a community radio station in Prince Edward County. I was on the board, and we got a license. It took us about 3 years to get organized and finally get on air. And now we're on air. We've been on air since October.
99.3.
99.3 County Radio FM. And it's a really good station. And I just recently, only a few weeks ago, got elected as the new chair of the board.
Was it the salary?
Yeah, it's all volunteer. Community radio, we only have one paid employee. I think it's a good place for people to come and volunteer, because you're going to learn a lot, as you would right here at Loyalist College on the station, which I listen to sometimes as well. So I'm really excited to be involved in that. It's not the first time I've been involved in radio, because I was involved with the big commercial station in Ottawa for many years, from its inception, Shea FM, with a partner. So that's what I'm doing. And, I'm kind of retired from actively being in the music business. I used to be on the board of Star Maker, SEMA, Roy Thompson Hall, Massey Hall, and one time or another in the Factor things. But I started Much Fact, which is Video Fact. We always called Video Fact. But now I'm trying to do less. So I only partly succeed in doing less, but I'm trying to do less because I've got lots of other things I like to do as well.
So last question for me, then we'll open up to the floor. You've done quite a few interviews in your lifetime, right?
Yeah, I'm one.
Yeah. So what's the question that you never got that you really wish somebody would ask you?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. That's great. That's a good question.
What would you like to say?
I don't want to disappoint you, but I haven't spent a lot of sleepless nights going, why have I never been asked this?
What am I really? But what do you have?
Well, I don't know. I can't really. I don't know. It seems like a trick question.
No, it's not really. It's just
I'm not gonna. I don't know. It's not gonna about that. I don't know.
Well, we'll leave it with you.
How did you get so darn handsome?
That's easier. That's easier.
That's the question I wish somebody would.
Well, we can go back to that later. So I'd like to favor the students first of all. And I know we've got some members of the community here, which is great. I really would like to chance to ask as well. But show of hands, students, to questions. A little louder for Bernie. Yeah. Go ahead, Zenga. Yeah. Actually, you know what? You want to take the mic?
He's loud enough.
He's loud enough.
So I was just wondering, with all the success that you had with your record company, what was the deciding factor in letting it go or giving it to someone else?
Yeah, well, like I said, I sold it at the end of 2007. There's not any one particular reason, but I don't want to bore people with too much of my personal life, but I'd been in a hospital in 2005, which I recovered from very well. But, you start to think about your mortality, but mostly you start, Scott Fitzgerald, who I quote just every hour, he said that in America, and I think you could say in North America, so I think it applies to Canada as well, that nobody gets a second act, really. And I don't know how true that is anymore, but that was a very famous thing he said. And I started thinking that there was other things I might want to do. Now, I didn't really know what they were, but I knew that as long as I had a company that had 14 or so employees, I had over 500 records, had 20 Canadian artists, that I was, I could stumble over the world's greatest opportunity. Not necessarily financially or anything, but just thing. And I wouldn't even recognize it because I would be so busy. So I started thinking, I gotta maybe just get out of this. But I also started thinking that I wasn't doing it as well as I used to. A little like a sports person, kind of, like a baseball fan. I was no longer going to be able to hit 300, or hit 40 home runs or whatever. And also, I also started enjoying it a little less. And I had promised myself, now, I say I had promised myself, I can't actually recall whether I ever did this or not. But in my mind, I'm pretty sure that at one point when I was younger, I said, if I don't enjoy going to work every day, and it gets, it's fine if you don't enjoy it every day, but if it gets to be overwhelming, then I'm going to change. And I started, not enjoying it as much. And I also knew that the last thing, on answer, but some combination of all these things, so I knew that the whole business was changing because of the digital tsunami, if you like. And although I thought it was kind of cool in many ways, and said that earlier in my speech when I talked about how many hits if I had a rocket launcher house, for instance, I had a hard enough time learning the music business the first time. I didn't want to relearn it the second time. I thought I could do something else. So I got a buyer, and I sold. And that's why.
Someone else? Show of hands? Sure.
Out of all the getting back to what you said about that 49-51 thing, do you ever remember what your career where you were trying to make a decision and it almost seemed like it could go either way and it really paid off for you and you're really proud of it, or vice versa?
I'm talking about records for one moment. When we put out Murray McLaughlin's first album, second album, in 1972, 73, the first single was a song called, which nobody will remember, called Lose We, but we made a decision, I made a decision, I was slightly against putting up that song, but we had a song called Farmer Song, and we put it on as a B-side, and so I don't think I'm quite answering your question. It's sort of, a lot of, you worry a lot. I worry a lot. I used to worry about everything. So almost everything, I mean, it's almost like everything that I did was always kind of a balancing act of sorts. Sometimes you look back in hindsight and see, well, hindsight and say, why was I worried about that? But, you know, I'll end up in my grave having spent more time worrying about things that never happened than I did thinking about the things that did happen. Yeah.
I had a question about your honorary degree from York University.
Right, yes. Are you questioning why they gave it?
I'm actually curious what a doctorate of letters is and what it meant to you to receive that.
It meant a lot to me. I was very, very proud of that. And, you know, I don't know exactly what it means to me in my everyday life, but when I was notified that I was getting it and during the ceremony, I was really thrilled and very, very proud of it. And, you know, I never finished grade 10. I didn't actually finish grade 10 at all. I tried it 2 or 3 times. I took grade 10 and grade 11 together, you know, carrying some subjects. But I was a terrible student and I was quitting school all the time. I don't think getting this honorary degree makes up for that, but it was a real thrill to be at York. And I'd accompanied Bruce Coburn, who has 9 of those, to a lot of his. And, you know, I think he deserved every one of them. It probably crossed my mind in some way. I wouldn't mind getting one of these. So when it came, I was very, 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 very happy. I don't know whether you said, what does it mean? Or you meant more, what does it mean to me, which I think I answered. I don't really know what a doctor of letters is exactly. I think it means that I'm a literary giant.
I think that's what it is.
I hope. That's what it is. It's a literary kind of thing.
That's a great question. Gretchen Lee is asking to ask you a question. Where did the name True North Records come from?
Question. So in 1969, when I said earlier I left Toronto, and where I left and went to was Callahan, which is, you know, right up Highway 62, right to Highway 60, turn right, go a few kilometers to the right, go a little south, and I bought a farm there. I moved onto a commune for a short while. There's a long story in my book that's fun. I wrote a whole chapter about it. But anyway, after being there for about 7 or 8 months, I decided that I was like at the age of 24, I was too young to retire, no matter how much I was enjoying living there. And I was starting to run out of money also. And I started thinking about, you know, coming back to Toronto and re-entering into the music business, such as it was. And I started realizing that what I should do is own my own record company. That the things I had done prior, I won't get into all of that detail, had not succeeded largely because you lose control to the bigger record companies in those days. And so I started thinking about starting a record company, and I was sitting outside on the porch of our house in Callahan. It's a 100-acre farm. There's beautiful land there. It's just absolutely gorgeous. It's still, it's not quite as untouched as it used to be, but it was so pristine. We used to be able to drink water right out of the rivers there and stuff. But the name just popped into my head. I don't know who asked that question, so I'm always looking around. Oh, okay. So the name just popped into my head, really. I can't really exactly tell you why, but it seemed exactly right. Now, when you used to sit on the porch and you could see the sky, something that you don't see in Toronto, you could see all the stars. And although I never really was much of a astronomer, although I loved the idea of astronomy, I'll tell you that, you know, I was aware of the North Star like everybody else was. And although I didn't name it True North because of the North Star, somehow it all just came together, and the compass point being True North. So, and it just seemed to be, it was a very fortunate choice. It's stood up well over time. I'm very
years. So a last student question maybe for now, Mara, if you, Mara.
If you could go back to the very beginning of your career with all the knowledge you have now, both how well things went and how difficult, would you pick a different job or would you stick with this knowing how gratifying it was in the end?
Yeah, no, I can't imagine doing anything other than what I did. I mean, I could imagine doing some stuff better, etc., maybe correcting a few things, but no, I'm totally satisfied. I mean, the only other thing that ever occurred to me was to be a writer, and that was more a fantasy than anything else. And now that I had an opportunity to write a book and realize how hard it is, I made the right choice. I mean, no, I'm one of those very lucky people who fell in almost by accident into what I did and never did anything else. So other than part-time jobs when I went to school, I never really worked for anybody in my life. Although in the end, you know, when you're in the music business, you end up feeling you're working for everybody in a way, because everybody's telling you what to do all the time. But no, I'm fairly satisfied that I ended up doing the right thing, or at least I was in the right business. Whether I did it right or not is a whole other question.
So we just throw it open to the floor and jump on in.
I owe actually a great deal of my adult success to your former business partner, Harvey Glad. That whole radio station in Ottawa was good. And you mentioned YouTube and the digital tsunami. How important is radio still to this day to promoting music?
Good question. I'm going to answer that. First of all, I'll just sort of do a graph for you in a way. I think in the period I put out most of our records, you know, if you go back into, say, you know, any time between I got into business in 1965, let's say, and you go right to, say, I don't know, 2005 even, if you like. You know, radio was 90% of the reason that people heard the music that they ended up loving. So it was really, really crucial to the record business. I mean, the marriage between radio and records is phenomenal. It's, you know, they're always at each other, but it's a phenomenally important relationship. And it was only after that period, too, I mean, it was maybe more like even earlier, 2000 maybe, but that other methods. So I'll tell you what it is for that period of time, 65 to 205, let's say, on average, I'd say 90% of the reason you became successful was radio. But I would say now that it's dropped down to maybe only 60% or 65%. Now, that's still a pretty important number, 65%. But there used to be almost no other way to get home. So even, you know, people who everybody holds up with great high esteem, like Bob Dylan and people, I mean, you know, he became extremely popular because he got hits. I mean, he would have been successful anyway. I mean, so, you know, there's sort of like that becomes a whole other topic. But, you know, Led Zeppelin, all of these people, they all got on radio. They all got played on radio. So radio is still really, really important. The only problem now is radio has become so niche to survive that it still is responsible. I mean, you know, just about everything that was on the Grammys the other night, those are all radio hits, you know. It's not like there's some big secret underground. I wish there was. Now, but there is alternatives. And in my era, there wasn't alternatives. So yes, people become successful through the internet. And they become successful on YouTube, et cetera, and they can force the issue. But radio is really, really an extremely important component to how people are exposed to music. I'd like to hear radio play more adventurous music. But then I've been saying that since 1965. Largely what that is a secret code for. I'd like to hear them play more of my language. Yeah, so, you know, that's, I mean, some of my best friends are station, and my involvement with Harvey Glatt was not just with Shea FM, but at Shea, when Harvey was putting together his original ownership, he called us and we invested, and it was a great investment, and Harvey's a great guy. I speak to him, I don't know, once a week maybe. So I'll tell him hello.
I was just curious, what musicians did you never had a chance to work with, and I'm sure that's few.
No, it's a lot.
Do you wish that you could have worked with?
Okay, well, two answers to that. You know, I don't really wish I did anything I don't really walk around going, not because I'm smart or self-satisfied, but I just don't have, you know, I'm semi-satisfied with what I did to the point where I don't go, oh, I wish. But, you know, I'm just like every other human being. I mean, you know, I would like to manage the Beatles, you know, why not, you know, but you know, I don't, you know, but there are great, I mean, in a way, if you rephrase that question and said, who do I really admire from our era, you know, I mean, Bob Dylan, Leonard Cohen, you know, Joni and Neil. Yeah, I got to promote a lot of the concerts through these people, so I know a lot of them. Don't know them. They're not always my best friends, but we had a big concert division in the 70s, and so we did tours with Neil Young, tours with Joni Mitchell, and tours with Gordon Lightfoot, and all kinds of, you know, Harry Chapin, all of them, Jackson Brown. And I listened to a lot of music, too. I listened to a lot of music from the 50s, because to some degree, my musical ear comes all the way from the 50s when I was like 10 years old. And I listen to some of those records, and I often go, these records are so perfect, I just wish I could start all over again, because I like to try to make some records like that. You know, some strange things, and you know, and I listen to a lot of R&B stuff, and I just go, you know, I hear a group that people probably don't even spend that much time listening to, like somebody as commercial as the Spinners. And I just listen to the quality of those songs and the production, and I go, it's so fantastic. So believe me, there's a lot of stuff I would have liked to have maybe done, got involved in, but in terms of walking around, I never go, oh, geez, you know, I really fucked that up. I wish I, excuse my language, but so, you know, yeah, there's people I would have liked to maybe work with, but I'm not desperate for the experience.
So maybe one more. Now, I know I got an email from somebody who said that you were his hero, I think, or something. I'm not sure if he made it here tonight or not, but I just wondered.
That's usually what happens to people who think I'm their hero.
There's somebody who said, wow.
Which is why I'm still their hero.
I guess maybe he didn't make it. I don't know. I guess not. And so, okay, well, I think then we'll call it close. And I have a little something I want to give you. And I don't know if there's any coincidence left in the world or not, but a student who was in my photography class in the first year that I taught, her name was Gaby Eisenkole. Her name is now Gaby Von Gons.
Oh, yes, I know.
You know?
Sure.
So she did a book of portraits of people of a certain stature in this country.
Yeah.
And so when she saw that you were coming here, she sent me a Facebook message, and she said, wow, you know, I wish I could be there, but she said, here's the picture I did of Bernie.
Yeah, wow.
And it was
that's beautiful.
It was cool. I thought, wow, well, can you send me the digital file? And so she said, well, Joe, would you sign it on my behalf? I'm going, like, that isn't the way it works, Gaby. Don't you remember? And she couldn't be here to sign it, but when she's back next, she will.
Okay.
And, so
well,
just
I
a
love
token.
that. She's a wonderful photographer, and she came over to my house one day, and
It's a lovely image.
yeah, and I think that photo was taken in our house. Yeah, so it's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. And so on behalf of everyone,
Thank you very much.
thanks for doing So we will be sitting at the table at the back. The bookstore has 20 copies of both Bruce's book and Bernie's book. Bernie is quite happy to sign them for you. So